30 long months. It's been 2.5 years, guys. This thing's been going on. Tennessee internal investigation, NCAA investigation into the program. It's all over. The punishments from the NCAA came down on Friday. It's still good news for Tennessee. Continuing that conversation with some major takeaways right here on a Monday, Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into it, a Monday edition of Locked On Vols. Appreciate you guys for being here. Shout out everydayers. We got a whole lot to get into today, and we're going to start with Adam Sparks of Knox News, and we're going to get right into it. Adam, you and Mike Wilson and your whole crew over there at Knox News done a fantastic job over the weekend and since Friday, and kind of reacting and kind of digging down deep into, the punishments from the NCAA and the 30-month-long, 2.5-year investigation. Your overall thoughts on how Tennessee fared: $8 million, 5-year probation, but no bowl ban.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides to this. There's the Jeremy Pruitt coaching side, and then there's the Tennessee side. The Jeremy Pruitt coaching side is that he obviously got hammered like we thought he would with a pretty steep show cause. The staff did also. If you add up the numbers of the show causes on that staff, including Pruitt, it's 8 coaches, including Pruitt, 39 years of show causes. That's an enormous number. I think for Pruitt's side of it, if he could have done it again, he would have taken the show cause early, agreed to a negotiated resolution, and he would have at least maybe be into some time served at this point, because it was obvious he was going to get a show cause, especially when a couple of his staff members already had turned on him midway through the process. The other side of it is, and so the Pruitt side is not really a surprise. The other side of it, Tennessee side, is it's at the least it's making the best of a bad situation. At the best, it's a master class in how to handle NCAA cases, especially in the new era. Now, this would not have worked out as well for Tennessee if the violations had occurred a year or two earlier, because the legislation would not have been in their favor. But the fact that it happened when it did, they got a phenomenal team they put together. They spent a lot of money on lawyers, best lawyers money can buy for these types of things. They had a strategy led by Donde Plowman early on that really worked out well. They cooperated, which has been discouraged by a lot of schools in the past for good reason, but they stuck with it. They cooperated. They played the game the NCAA would like you to play in this era. And it paid off. I mean, and I've reported it already. A lot of the violations that they got were pretty similar to what they offered in a plea bargain like 2 years ago. So, and they of course self-imposed a lot of these. So, all the news that they got of the penalties was kind of what they thought was already coming. The only question was the postseason ban, would it come or not? And it didn't. And so, where they were a few days ago and where they are now, it's a pretty big victory because they didn't get that bowl ban.
So let me ask you this. I came on here and I reacted on Friday after, all the news that settled and everything, but you and I both were on a conference call with, the head of the Committee on Infractions on Friday, kind of explaining, their side of it, why they did this, why they did that. And obviously if Tennessee didn't play ball, they were going to get a postseason bowl ban. But when you look at the $12.6 million or whatever it was for the buyout of Jeremy Pruitt, and seeing Tennessee go through all this over the last 2.5 years, and still have to pay $8 million, I want to ask you, was it worth it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the argument here is that people like to split this into two categories, two outcomes. Either you pay the $12.6 million buyout and none of this ever happens, or you don't pay it and all this stuff happens and you still get the fine and all those sort of things. By the way, Tennessee sort of knew what the fine was going to be. There's a structure in the new NCAA penalties that it's encouraged to pay the value of postseason ban, even though you don't take the postseason ban. They knew about the $5,000 mandatory. They knew about the percentage there was some bickering about the percentage of the budget, but they kind of knew what it was going to be. But I think we tend to put this into those two outcomes. I don't think if Jeremy Pruitt had taken the buyout, if they'd offered it, he took it and went away, that there would be no talk ever of any violations. I mean, and I've reported that I read 6,000 text messages over 2.5 years. And you could see, just if you read those sort of chronologically, you can see how it was unraveling late in the process and how it was going to be exposed. This was going to be exposed. If Jeremy Pruitt had taken the buyout, then you would still have to circle back around and do an investigation. And maybe it wouldn't have been as bad because there wouldn't have been that much cooperation, but then they would have gotten to a mess about trying to get the money back from Jeremy Pruitt or stopping the payments. And this process could have gone any longer. In the grand scheme of things, $8 million fine plus some other things, or $13 million buyout. This is not a huge deal to athletic departments in the SEC. So it was more about the principle of it, but I think it was more about also just making sure they did everything that they could to avoid the postseason ban. Had they paid Jeremy Pruitt to go away, and then violations would have come out and they would have pushed those to the side, the NCAA could have found out. Then they would have gotten the postseason ban because they were not upfront about the violation. Mm-hmm. This could have gone much worse had they paid the buyout.
Yeah, and not to mention too, I mean, Tennessee paid, Adam, you'd probably know better than me, $2.2 million on the investigation itself.
Yeah, it's about $2 million right now in legal fees. It's like I said before, it's the best lawyers money can buy if you're fighting an NCAA case. It's Michael Glazier's bunch, Kyle Skillman, Michael Sheridan. Those are NCAA infractions gurus, and a lot of that staff, those lawyers that Tennessee used to be enforcement staff for the NCAA. So in other words, they used to be prosecutors, and now they're attorneys for the defendants. So and also as prosecutors, the inside game of what the infractions committee is looking for. They've been on the other side, so now they're getting paid on the opposite side.
It's like in recruiting when you want a defensive back, but he played quarterback in high school. It's like, all right, well, he knows how all that works. Could be a good asset at safety at the next level. Kind of a little different, but kind of on that same wavelength.
That's an analogy made by a former college football player.
Hey, Adam, again, you and Mike and John, y'all done awesome work the last couple of days. I've really enjoyed kind of reading the depths of the articles and everything. You guys, of course, along with other publications, VolQuest included, open records request, and essentially you can dig through those emails and those text messages. I don't want to give anything away because I encourage people to go check out your work, but what was the biggest thing that was just kind of a shocker that you reported on or that you saw in these emails and these text messages, where it's like, oh my goodness, this is the magnitude that they were going and not even hiding it, essentially?
Yeah, I think obviously there are a number of things, and we still have stories coming out. The text messages story, when I got the text messages and I began reading them and saw how brazen some of them were, so we had sort of behind the curtain. There's a list of stories that I knew I was going to be working on, that Mike was going to be working on, and you have to sort of figure out which one of these is going to hit best and when's the best time for them to hit. And as soon as I started digging into the text messages, I immediately thought, this is going to be the one that people read the most. I mean, because of the profanity, obviously, people want to see dirt behind the scenes. But, I think it just demonstrated, those text messages, about how they thought they wouldn't get caught, and also how sloppy this thing had gotten. I mean, there's a few that jump out. Larry Harold, eventually was an analyst for Tennessee, and Shelton Felton, the assistant coach, swapped some text messages, and Larry Harold had sent Shelton Felton something that was sort of implicated, maybe an NCAA violation. And Shelton Felton replied, "Don't be sending that to my work phone." And Larry Harold acknowledged that and said, "Absolutely, yeah, we don't want any of this stuff on our work phones. So I'll make sure I send to a personal phone next time, because we're doing epic stuff." And then there was a couple of text messages after that. And I mean, of course, the funny thing about that is he's saying, "Don't send this to my work phone," and yet he's replying to his work phone, acknowledging that they're doing wrongdoing. There was that. you know, I kind of felt sorry in the end. And Kaner, you've covered recruiting closer than I have over the years. I felt sorry for the recruiting directors, staff, Bethany Gunn, Chantrice Boone. They got pretty hefty show cause orders. I felt sorry for them in reading their day-to-day text messages, which was mostly reserving restaurants, hotel stays, entertainment, bowling, arcades, just all this sort of stuff that like administrative assistants or travel agents do. And then having to change them right after, this recruit wants to eat at this restaurant at this time, so we have to book that. It's text back and forth. And then 30 minutes later, this recruit changed his mind. He wants to go eat seafood now. Well, the recruit's high school coach has changed his mind. He's not hungry. He wants to eat later. So then you got to cancel that reservation. And suddenly the recruit at 11 o'clock at night wants a pizza. And so this recruiting assistant director's got to hop in the car and go drive and get a pizza and deliver it to this kid. Now, all these were impermissible visits, and these were during COVID. And these broke NCAA violations. But the boots on the ground recruiting staff were the ones that were having to carry these out. And they couldn't complain because you can't complain about breaking rules. Yeah. And you could see, again, late in the process, chronologically, if you look in the last 2 or 3 months of the text messages, they were starting to complain back and forth about players or about recruits taking advantage of these under the table perks. And that's what I found is a very human kind of response to it. Because as you know, anytime you look back in NCAA history, all these recruiting scandals, most of them fall apart when there is a power play. The coaches or boosters or whatever think that they own the player because they're taking money or perks or whatever, when it's really the player owns the school or the booster or the coach, because they're the ones taking, but the coaches are the one giving. And at the end of it, you saw where recruits, instead of showing up to a secret visit with them and their high school coach, with them and their parents, which is completely normal, they were suddenly showing up with like 10, 12, 14 people at a restaurant because they knew the tab was going to be picked up at the end. And nobody could say anything about it because they weren't supposed to be there anyway. And so I felt a little empathy. I felt some sympathy for the recruiting staff that was having to carry these out, because obviously they didn't just dream up these scenarios. They just had to work at them.
Yep. Or, you're going to get fired. So
right.
A lot of good stuff, a lot of different stories from you guys over there. Kind of in closing, Adam, and I appreciate your time. What's this say about Josh Heupel and the job that he's done the last 30 months? Kind of revitalizing this program, and obviously last year, double-digit wins and a lot of momentum heading into 2023.
Well, I think all you need to know about Heupel and the job that he's done is look at the penalties that were handed out, and there was some freak out by some Tennessee fans. Oh, how are you going to win with where you're cutting your off-campus evaluations or your official visits or your communication? Suddenly you get longer dead periods. Well, they've always recruited under those restrictions. Josh Heupel, since he's been at Tennessee, since they had these things self-imposed already, he's never been at 100%. He's never been on an even playing field at Tennessee with competitors, because they had already self-imposed a lot of these things. So if the question is, how is Josh Heupel going to manage this? He's under the same restrictions he's been all this time, and look at the results he's gotten.
And Adam, sorry to cut you off, but in terms of scholarship reductions, it's actually going to get a little bit easier, because you've already, at the end of this year, will have 18 in 2 years.
Yep.
And you just have 10 more to go over the span of 5.
Yeah, let's see. So it's what is it? It's 16. They already self-imposed. I think it's 2 more this year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's 18. So then you're down to 10 to cut. And the thing is, the 5-year. So that's sort of times. That's not even time served. That's just, you can cut those out of the 28 scholarships. But now the probation technically started like this week. So mm-hmm. It's 5 years now, and then you have 10. You have 10 left in the final 4 years. So, I mean, Kaner, you and I know as well as anybody, nobody plays with 85.
Yeah.
You play with 83, you play with 82, mm-hmm. You always leave a couple out there in case you can get a transfer in August or whatever.
Yep.
So, yeah, they've they've been under these restrictions this entire time and brought in a top 10 class and won 11 games last year. And, now it's, I know Josh Heupel and his staff don't want to say it's fine. There's no problem at all, because they still have to recruit under these restrictions, but it's completely normal to them at this point. I guess the bigger question is, when this ends in about 5 years, if Josh Heupel is still winning at this level, wow, what would happen if he had no restrictions? Maybe we'll know in 2028.
Adam Sparks has done an awesome job on this whole story over at knoxnews.com. Go check out his work. Give him a follow on Twitter, Adam Sparks. Adam, appreciate the time as always, man. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Gainer.
Hey guys, I want to take a quick moment and tell you about our friends over at FanDuel, a proud sponsor of Locked On Balls and Locked On Podcast Network, and we couldn't be more thrilled to be in business with them. You can take your first swing at Major League Baseball betting over at FanDuel.com, and there you can get 10 times your first bet in bonus bets. That's up to $200. Baseball season going on right now. The All-Star break is in the rearview mirror. There's tons more games left, and there's money that you can win. That's right, just $20, right? And you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Not bad. That's $200 where you can spend betting anything from the money line to the over-under, who you think will have the first hit, home run, stolen base in a game. Prop bets are endless, and it's all on the app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use, where you get paid instantly. That's over at FanDuel Sportsbook. No better place to bet on all the Major League Baseball action than over at FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So what I need you to do right now, today, sign up at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. I encourage you to do that, all right? That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Some really good stuff there from Adam Sparks, Knox News, the Knox News Sentinel. I encourage you to go check out all of his work, Mike Wilson's work, and our work over at VolQuest.com. Obviously, we were putting out a ton of content on Friday and over the weekend. Brent Hubbs had an awesome column. Grant Ramey had a ton of written content as well. So everything you need to know about the NCAA's reaction, punishment, and all that, and how it was overall a pretty decent day for Tennessee. It's over at VolQuest.com. Thanks so much for making Locked On Balls your first listen each and every day. Again, subscribe to Locked On Balls on the YouTube channel if you wouldn't mind. Rate me 5 stars, leave me a positive review. Follow, subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts, and get in those Twitter Tuesday questions for tomorrow's show. All right, so in this segment, before we get into our Scouting the Opponent series, kicking off with Virginia, just like the Vols will kick off with Virginia here in less than 2 months, a little bit of a Josh Heupel appreciation here. I mean, what you've read, what we've heard, what we've talked about with the NCAA ruling and all that over the last couple of days and the last 30 months. I mean, it's been pretty incredible, and this is not breaking news, but it's been pretty incredible the job Josh Heupel's done here at the University of Tennessee. You would think that it would take a couple of different years just to get bowl eligible potentially. Recruiting certainly can be better in recruiting, but recruiting's not been bad, and it's you've had a whole lot of wins with Josh Heupel, Nico Imaliava, David Hobbs, Arian Carter, James Pierce, just naming a couple here that were late wins kind of leading up to signing day. Of course, Nico was way early in the cycle, but that was the biggest win overall so far. But it's been pretty incredible. He's gone to 2 bowl games, both had winning seasons in both years here in Tennessee. Leading the nation in offense and all that type of stuff, winning a New Year's Six bowl game, double-digit wins, best win in 15, 16 years here at the University of Tennessee, talking about the 2022 campaign. But quickly, let's kind of break down how good that's been and remember all that was lost following that 2020 season. First, year number 1, 2021, Tennessee scored 39.3 points per game. That was up from, I want to say like 20 points per game in 2020. 39.3 points per game. That was 7th in the nation in scoring, 2nd in the SEC behind Alabama. And of course, Alabama had that historic season. Total offense in 2021, Tennessee averaged 475.3 yards per game. That was 9th in the country, 2nd to Alabama and the SEC. So year number 1 was a top 10 offense. And we talked about blind faith, Josh Heupel, play caller in this league, 5 years as head coach, how his offenses have always ranked in the top 10. Okay, so that's not breaking news. Last year, 2022, number 1 in total offense, number 1 in scoring offense. Led the nation with 525.5 yards per game. Led the nation with 46.1 points per game. Truly incredible. That was year number 2. Despite all this cloud looming over the University of Tennessee, negative recruiting, a lot of national publications trying to take shots at Tennessee, Josh Heupel did all this offensively in his first 2 years here at Knoxville. Tennessee was 7-5, went to a bowl game, finished 7-6 in year 1. Tennessee was 10-2 in the regular season, went to the Orange Bowl, beat Clemson, finished 11-2 in the regular season. Should have had a Heisman finalist, had plenty of All-Americans, had a Biletnikoff Award winner. All that type of stuff. I mean, that's just his first 2 years here in Knoxville. And keep in mind, right? I mean, we don't cover it much on the show except for when it was happening. But there were some key cogs who left the program. Over 30 total players darted the transfer portal, but some key components and key players to what Tennessee did in 2019 and in 2020 under Jeremy Pruitt left the program and moved on. Guys like, you had 3 quarterbacks who at least started games and played a lot in 2020. Jerry Garantano, JT Shrout, Brian Maurer. Obviously, none of those guys were, Peyton Manning, and all those guys had their struggles. I'm not trying to say that they didn't, but obviously, it was pretty incredible when you look at the quarterbacks that had left the quarterbacks, at least, that had left the program, from the 2020 season. Look at the running backs. Eric Gray. Eric Gray goes to Oklahoma. Ty Chandler uses his COVID year free eligibility and goes to North Carolina and has a really, really good year. Look at the wide receivers. Brandon Johnson transferred and went to UCF and had a really good year. It was kind of funny. Josh Heupel comes from UCF. Brandon Johnson transfers to UCF and had a really good year. Malachi Wideman, who was just, he wasn't selected, but he was in the NFL supplemental draft a couple of weeks ago. He was a highly prized or a highly touted recruit that was set for some playing time. They got a little bit of playing time in 2020, not a whole lot, but Brandon Johnson was the big wide receiver that you lost and transferred away. You lost all 4 of your starting linebackers from the 2020 season. Henry To'oTo'o, Alabama, Quavaris Crouch, Michigan State, DeAndre Johnson, Miami, and Kevon Bennett, of course, who was dismissed during that 2020 season. I think he ended up going to Western Kentucky. Key Lawrence, one of the biggest, recruiting wins in that class of 2020, I believe. He left and went to Oklahoma. Brent Cimaglia, your kicker, who was a really good kicker here for years at Tennessee, he left and kicked his final season at Georgia Tech. Those are just a couple of the transfers who left the program, and not even counting the guys who left for the NFL draft, of course, and offensive lineman Trey Smith, wide receiver Josh Palmer, cornerback Bryce Thompson, who were big contributors to what Tennessee was doing in 2019 and 2020. You lost all of that, and yet you still are where you are. And Tennessee is in a much, much, much better spot now than where I think if you would have continued on with Jeremy Pruitt, obviously, and that's probably not breaking news. Josh Heupel made an appearance with Peter Burns on the Paul Feinbaum show on Friday afternoon. He asked of his reaction in terms of, finally having this, punishments out there, moving on. He said, well, we knew it was coming down the pipeline for a while now. We got word late yesterday that we would definitely have a conclusion to it today. This is Josh Heupel on Friday. Excited that we're able to reach a great conclusion here. Our administration has worked for 2.5 years on trying to find a resolution. They found out about what was going on, reported it, and have been transparent. And we wanted to protect our athletes and make sure that they had an opportunity to compete for championships. We were able to find that. Really happy that we got a chance to put this behind us and we can finally move forward. Later on in the interview, he was asked about what was the hardest part about dealing with this the past 2.5 years was for his program. And he said, certainly it was recruiting. It was in recruiting. Our players, because they are with you every single day, they have faith and trust in what you're doing and leading that program the right way and going about what you're trying to do and accomplish for them. But I think the hardest thing for our entire staff was in recruiting because it had nothing to do with us who were currently here. People tried to use it against us in recruiting negatively. We had to develop great trust with the recruits and their families. You talk about culture you're building, and you talk about what happened and what you think the end result will be with the NCAA. Today's word gives us the ability to put it behind us. It's out in the open. It's finalized. They can all realize that they have an opportunity to go and play for championships. That was Josh Heupel on the Paul Feinbaum show on Friday. So clearly he's thrilled to put this behind him, and I don't think that there might be a happier guy than Josh Heupel and his coaching staff now that they don't have to answer questions and all that in terms of recruiting. Again, I mentioned a lot of this on the bonus episodes Friday when I was reacting to the NCAA punishments. You can go back and check that out, as well as Friday's normal show. That's up on the YouTube page and, of course, wherever you get your podcast. So Josh Heupel was a happy man on Friday afternoon, knowing that you can finally move on. And the NCAA, obviously Tennessee was very cooperative, and it had not been as cooperative. It would have received a postseason bowl ban, but the NCAA did get together prior to all this happening at Tennessee and decided on future investigations and rules of infractions for the Committee of Infractions, that they did not want to punish innocent student athletes for things that happened before them or the coaching staff happened before they were even there. And that's a big reason why Tennessee's not receiving a postseason bowl ban. And I think Tennessee would have fought tooth and nail if it had received a postseason bowl ban. But, of course, that was not the case here. So, bottom line, Tennessee, again, 5-year probation, loss of 28 scholarships, already self-imposed 18, so 10 more over the course of 5 years to a year, essentially. Some recruiting restrictions in the open period and official visits and all that, but of course it's already self-imposed a lot of that. $8 million fine. Jeremy Pruitt, 6-year show cause. Derek Ansley, 2-year show cause. Brian Niedermeyer already negotiated, I believe, a 3-year show cause. And of course, some of those in the recruiting office as well get a show cause too. So, kind of what's your reaction over the last couple of days? Had the weekend to sleep on it, read up on it, and all that. And of course, we heard from Adam Sparks of Knox News. Would love to hear about it. If you have any Twitter Tuesday questions on this subject, @_Kaner and @LockedOnVols. Hey, when we come back, we're going to kick off a new series right here on Locked On Vols. Scouting the opponent. We'll begin with Virginia right here when Locked On Vols returns. All right, guys, I hope you are having a great start to your work week here on a Monday. And with that in mind, we want to kick off a new series right here on Locked On Vols. It is Scouting the Opponent. We will take time over the course of the next couple of weeks to break down and preview each of Tennessee's 12 regular season opponents and kind of tell you about their offseason, what they have returning, what they've lost, all that and more. And we're going to go in order here. We kind of did that with the SEC with some hosts around the Locked On Podcast Network over the summer. This is some more research and nitty-gritty stuff. And today we're going to start with Virginia. So the Virginia Cavaliers, it's going to be week 1, going to be played on September the 2nd, and it's going to be a neutral site game, because it's going to be in Nashville at Nissan Stadium. Head coach Tony Elliott, he is entering year number 2 at the helm, formerly a really good offensive coordinator at Clemson, and his name was in the head coaching discussions whenever Tennessee was trying to find a replacement for Jeremy Pruitt under Danny White before they, I don't want to say settled, but guys, I mean, it pretty much was. Josh Heupel was not Danny White's first choice, regardless of what he might have said in the opening press conference. And hey, that's a good thing. A lot of times the head coaches that you end up getting weren't your first, second, or third choices, and it's worked out pretty well for Tennessee. But Tony Elliott is trying to turn around a Virginia program it was real sad in a number of different ways in 2022. 3-7, 1-6 in ACC play. Only played 10 games because later in the year, 3 football players tragically, fatally shot, and they ended up canceling the last 2 games, and it was a true tragedy. It was a horrifying situation. Of course, the team not playing well on the field, but obviously this is more important than football and all that combined. But you want to move on, you want to honor those guys, and you want to play some better football. And so trying to come in here in this 2023 season, trying to get off to a good start, obviously. But, what you're doing is you're trying to replace an offense that was just abysmal in 2022. Virginia averaged 17.6 points per game. That was last in the ACC. Averaged 344 yards of total offense. That was 10th in the ACC. 32% on third downs offensively. That was not very good. Your quarterback, your 3-year starter at Virginia, Brennan Armstrong, he transferred to NC State after just 1 year under Tony Elliott's pro-style offense. Your probable quarterback is going to be a guy coming in from Monmouth FCS program in Tony Muskett, you believe, and he threw for nearly 2,000 yards in 2022, 17 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. So, of course, he's got to win that job, and that's probably your front runner to be the quarterback of Virginia moving forward. You bring back some experience at running back, but not an awful lot. Perry Jones, 365 yards rushing in 10 games a season ago. Mike Hollis, 215 yards rushing. You have Xavier Brown, 210 yards rushing. You bring in Kobe Pierce, or Kobe Prince, excuse me, from Clemson. He's a running back transfer into the program. You lost your top 4 wide receivers at the position from last year, so obviously lacking for some playmakers. And on the offensive line, I don't think that they were their 4 true starters, but 4 offensive linemen with starting experience have left the program, either graduated or transferred away. And you're breaking in a new offensive line coach from Stanford in Terry Heffernan. And he's incorporating and inheriting a unit and an offensive unit, but an offensive line unit that surrendered 3.4 sacks per game and 3.7 yards per carry last year. So that offensive line needs an awful lot of work. So obviously, very much a work in progress offensively. Tony Elliott is an offensive-minded head coach, and they need to take big, monumental steps in 2023. Defensively, they bring back a ton of starters. Pretty much the entire front 7 minus linebacker Nick Jackson returns for Virginia, which is a good thing. They were mediocre, about middle in the pack of the ACC last year. 371 yards of total defense. That was 7th in the ACC. 24 points per game is what they gave up. That was 7th in the ACC. I keep saying SEC. It's ACC. And I think their strength, of course, is the front 7, but particularly on the edge. You got Chico Bennett, who had 7 sacks a season ago. He returns. Camarion Butler, who had 4 sacks. He returns. You lose both your starting cornerbacks, which is not good, but you bring back 4 guys at the safety position with the starting experience, including James Sanker, who had 63 tackles a season ago, and that was good enough for 2nd on the team for Virginia. But basically, this is kind of simple. It's a rebuilding program. Year number 2 for Tony Elliott. They were horrible in year 1 under his tutelage, and of course, the unspeakable tragedy that was just so upsetting. So much bigger than football, obviously. And you're trying to move on. You're trying to turn over a new leaf and get a whole lot better. Offensively, you have no playmakers, and you were so bad last year, and you don't have a whole lot of returners. Defensively, you were middle of the road. You returned the majority of your defense, which is a good thing. But the key to this game, I will say this. It's going to be week 1. I think Virginia and Tennessee will not be, who they are in week 1 is not who they will end up being, is what I'm trying to say. It's week 1. I think Tennessee can improve and get a whole lot better. They're going to be breaking in a lot of new starters, obviously a new quarterback. Virginia is pretty much breaking in a whole new side of the football, right? But the key to this game would be that front 7, particularly the edge presence for Virginia against the Tennessee offensive linemen who, trying to break in 3 new starters, 2 essentially new tackles, because any way you want to spin it, you'll have, you have John Campbell on the left side likely, but you'll have Gerald Mincy and J.J. Crawford, whoever wins that job, on the right side, which is opposite of where they played last year. So that front 7, the edges against Tennessee's new offensive tackles and new look offensive line, I think is going to be the key to the game. But I think Tennessee should have no issue with Virginia in week 1. It's pretty much going to be a home game, even though it's a neutral site game in Nashville at Nissan Stadium. And it should be a good Power 5 opponent for Tennessee to work out its kinks and try to, in my opinion, should win this game with ease. But obviously, working against a Power 5 opponent that's not just going to lay down. So that's kind of a scouting report on Tennessee's first opponent. That is Virginia. And we will continue this series on over the next couple of weeks right here at Locked On Vols. Tomorrow, of course, we'll take a look at Austin Peay, that week 2 matchup. Guys, appreciate you as always for tuning in right here at Locked On Vols. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're your first listen. Shout out everydayers for coming back and making this a routine stop and a part of your day. Tomorrow, we'll have the mailbag edition of the show right here, Locked On Vols. Send in questions, comments, concerns, anything you guys have at _Caner and at Locked On Vols. Appreciate Adam Sparks and Knox News for stopping by. That was some really good stuff here to kick off the top of the podcast, and we'll have more for you tomorrow. This is Locked On Vols.